Thanks for the introduction. Like she said, I'm Nick Paulson. Thanks for coming to the afternoon breakout session, at least the one Gary and I are in. And we're on camera now this afternoon and being recorded, so I'll have to be careful what I say. As she said, we're going to be talking about some equipment strategies, focusing on soybean profitability. I'm going to kind of give you an intro and then turn it over to Gary. And what I'm going to talk about is kind of just trying to set up some of the things that Gary's going to discuss with you. So we're going to look at some trends over time in the asset values associated with machinery that is held on farms, specifically grain operations in central Illinois. Also take a look at trends in the production costs related to power, so power costs over time, and then try to break those up in terms of breaking those down a little bit more and looking at how power costs vary across both profitability categories for those farms, as well as looking at how those power costs vary across farms planting different acreages to soybeans. So very corn-intense operations versus farms with closer to a 50-50 rotation versus farms with more soybean intensive acreage allocations. And then, like I said, Gary's going to take over and talk a little bit about some more specifically on some crop rotations, some investment strategies related to rotations and planting and tillage systems. So everything, all the data, the figures that we're using today are all coming from actual farms, primarily grain farms in central Illinois from the Illinois Farm Business Farm Management Association. Just to start off, before I get into some of the power-related production costs, nothing real surprising here, but if we take a look at the asset value for machinery on grain farms in Illinois and compare that to 12, 13 years ago, so compare 2000 to 2010, we have seen a very significant increase in the value of machinery and equipment held on farms. Larger farms do hold more equipment, but there is some efficiencies gained for larger operations, so this relationship doesn't go up linearly. But in general, we've seen asset values for machinery roughly double across most farm sizes since the year 2000. If we take a look at those machinery values on a per acre basis, again, between 2000 and 2010, those have roughly doubled, but I think this illustrates a little bit better the scale efficiency as you increase farm size that takes place in terms of looking at these numbers on a per acre basis. So very small farms, once you get down to 500 acres or less, there's kind of a minimum amount of machinery that's required, even with the small farm size, whereas once you get over 1,000 acres, there are some pretty big efficiencies in terms of being able to utilize machinery complements to fuller capacity by spreading them out across more acres. Getting into the production cost side of things, so I'm going to refer to production costs related to machinery and equipment as power costs. That's how they're categorized within the FBFM Association. It's how Gary talks about them and the crop budgeting that he does in each year. We've also seen these things increase pretty significantly over time, just like other production cost categories. Since 1995, about 150% increase, so more than doubling, well over more than a doubling in power costs. Annually, if we look at what's that increase been on average annually, it's about 6%, but as you'll see in the next slide, there are periods where these costs increase and then maybe come down and go back up, so there is some volatility. But since 1995, we've had a pretty significant increase in the costs within this large power category. The largest category increases, so the things that we include in power costs, which are outlined in the next slide, have been for fuel, but then also for depreciation. So again, as I kind of go through some of these numbers, I guess take them with a grain of salt and think a little bit about what it means to have depreciation costs increase as rapidly as they have, especially since 2006 and the investment that we've seen with some of the higher incomes going into making some new machinery investment. So these are the things that are included with power costs. So we do have things like utilities. It's a relatively small piece of these power costs. Repairs on machinery, anything that's hired out in terms of custom work, and then fuels allocated to light duty machinery, and then depreciation are the different categories that are included in this aggregate power cost number. Again, the total increase across all these has been about 150% since '95, 6% annual increase, and the two biggest increases have been in those fuel and depreciation categories, where we've seen a 7.5% increase in fuel costs each year and almost a 9% increase in depreciation each year over this 17-year time period that I'm looking at. So this actually gives you the numbers. Again, around $50 in the mid-90s for total power costs. About $120 was the average in 2011. So we saw an increase and then kind of a leveling off in the late 90s, early 2000s. Power costs then came down, but have been trending up fairly consistently since then, and we kind of saw the marked increase since 2006 in power costs. Similar picture, we'd have a similar picture up here if we were looking at input costs or some of the other production cost categories that are monitored in this data. Again, just to point out kind of where the big increases have taken place in that depreciation category. So the orange portion of these bars, and then in for the fuel category, that's where the largest increases have been contributing to the total increase, especially over the last 5 years. All right, so taking those numbers kind of asked us to break these down and relate these to profitability. So kind of the first set of slides I want to run through here is I took the farms that we used to put together these averages, okay, and grouped the farms into different performance categories or profitability categories. And what I did was I took the management returns that these farms earned each year, and I grouped the farms into quartiles, meaning if you're in the top quartile, that means that relative to all the other farms in Illinois for that year, you were in the top 25% in terms of profitability or management returns. Bottom quartile means you're in the bottom 25% compared to other farms within that year. So I'm going to compare the power costs, these power costs, things that I showed in this figure, compare those across the return quartiles to see how power costs vary across those farms earning those different return levels. And not surprisingly, farms that earn higher returns tend to have lower power costs. That's true for revenues, in that higher return farms are going to earn higher crop revenues. They're going to have lower direct input costs. But power costs is one of the areas where, especially between the top 25% or the top quartile and the bottom 25% or the bottom quartile of farms, we see a really significant difference in power costs. So just kind of supporting, again, something that isn't too surprising, but power cost control is a really important factor in terms of profitability. All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on in this slide, but I think the important thing to compare here again is the difference in the power costs for the farms that are in quartile 1. So again, that would be the low performing farms, the bottom 25% in any given year, and then the power costs for quartile 4, or those top 25% profitability farms. Okay, and the difference is really significant, and that relationship over time is really consistent. Okay, so if we compare the power costs for that bottom 25% to that top 25%, we have differences on the range of kind of $40 to $50 per acre difference in power costs. Okay, so again, the top performing farms are doing much better at managing those power costs, controlling those power costs compared to the bottom 25%. All right, the other thing we were kind of asked to talk a little bit about today is how do these power costs vary across farms that are planting different percentages of soybean acres, so farms that are more corn intensive versus more soybean intensive. So again, what I did here, instead of defining the groups that I'm going to compare in terms of returns that they earned, I grouped these by the percentage of total acreage allocated to soybean production. So in group 1, what I'm going to call group 1, the those are farms that have less than 35% of their tillable acres planted to soybeans. Group 2, between 35 and 50%, and then Group 3 is the more soybean intensive farms with at least half or more of their acres allocated to soybeans in any given year. About 30% of the farms fall in that first category. The majority, or about half the farms, fall in that second category, and then only 20% of the farms over this whole time period that I'm looking at were planting more than 50% of their acres to soybeans. And those percentages are something that has changed pretty dramatically over time, especially in the last 5 years. We've seen a pretty dramatic shift towards more corn-intensive rotations, more corn acres planted at the expense of soybean acres, particularly in central and northern Illinois. So this just shows you, again, this 30% in this group, 50% in this group, 20% in this group. That's the average over the time period, but that's how those groups have changed annually from 1995 to 2011. So when we saw soybean acres in the nation and in Illinois in general peak in the early 2000s, we had about a third farms actually planting at least 50% or more in soybeans in Illinois. Less than 10% planting less than 35% soybeans, and then the remainder in that 35 to 50% soybean acre category. 2010 and 2011, less than 10% of the farms were planting more than 50% soybeans, with the majority of farms actually planting less than 35% of their acres to soybeans. And there is some wheat acres obviously in this as well. But these numbers are mostly central, and these numbers are all central Illinois farms, so the amount of wheat acres here is very minimal. All right, so how do these power costs look across these acreage categories? Well, again, this is kind of setting up what Gary's going to talk about. We do see a really significant difference in terms of the power costs associated with more soybean intensive versus corn intensive farms. A lot of that, as Gary's going to point out, is due to harvest operations being much more expensive for corn than they are for soybeans. But in general, the more corn you plant, the higher power costs are going to be associated with that. And if we then look at, well, what's the ultimate impact then on returns? Okay, what we're seeing is that even though what our crop budgets tell us in terms of expectations for corn production or more corn-intensive rotations being more profitable, when we look historically, there just hasn't been evidence of that. Okay, so what I mean by that is we don't see a huge difference in the returns that the farms in the FBFM data actually earn if they're planting a lot more corn acres versus soybean acres. We don't see those corn-intensive farms actually earning higher returns that we might see in some of the budget numbers we look at compared to some of those soybean operations. One exception to that is 2011, where kind of the corn-intense operations in these three groups I defined did earn higher returns than those that were planting more soybeans. But again, if you look historically, the returns are pretty comparable across all three groups. There isn't a real strong relationship between planting more corn and earning higher returns. And I think, especially in some of the poor performance years in the late 90s and early 2000s, there's a real argument for a closer to 50-50 crop rotation from a risk management standpoint, because the very large negative returns did come for the group here, which was using a really corn-intense rotation choice, a lot of corn acres relative to soybean acres. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary. And he's going to talk about some more specific investment strategies.
Okay, it's on. All right, we're going to narrow our focus now a little bit more and talk about some of the investment strategies relative to power cost. One of the things that you did notice in Nick's slides is that we have seen power costs go up quite dramatically, particularly since 2006. That is probably expected because we had some fairly good income years since 2006, and one of the things that we've seen farmers do is buy machinery, and part of that probably is a tax motive or saving on tax. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that, but we'll see. One of the interesting things that I want to see is when we do have lower prices, you know, there's going to be a lot of machinery capacity sitting out there, and will we see lower cash rents as a result, or will people keep those rents bid up to keep machinery fully employed? I'm going to give you a little bit different look here at rotations in machinery cost. This overhead is essentially the same data that FBFM data, and each one of those dots is a farm. It happens to be an average of return. Oops. Don't hit that button. from 2008 through 2011. So each one of these four farms is a 4-year average. 2008, 9, 10, 11. So there's 4 years of returns averaged in here. Here's operator and farmland returns, which is a measure of profitability before paying for land. And we arrayed this based on percent acres in corn. So 50% of the acres in corn is here. And these are corn soybean farms, northern and central Illinois, so 50% acres in corn mean we have 50% acres in soybeans. And something over here, 70% acres in corn, would mean 30% acres in soybeans. One of the things you'll note here is, one, there is a considerable range in profitability over that time period, but that straight line there is a statistically fit line through that data, and you don't see any relationship between percent acres in corn and profitability. So we don't see in this time period from 2008 through 2011 acres in corn influencing profitability. Obviously, you also see some very more profitable farms. Some of them have close to 50-50 rotation, and some of them have much higher acres in corn. But overall, not a relationship related to percent acres in corn. A little bit different view of the numbers in those graphs. This is for farms, again, less than 50% acres in corn, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, and then over 70. Here's the average, and you can see, if anything, the average as we increase percent acres in corn goes down a little bit. Keep in mind, though, that you're averaging this. It's a pretty wide stuff. And here's 33% of the acres are above this, so there's 33% of the farms that had over $423 a return, 431, 435, and 409. So we have some pretty profitable farms that have some close to 50-50 corn soybean rotations. That actually is somewhat surprising, or I don't know if it's maybe not all that surprising, but somewhat surprising in the sense that if we do budgeting, and if you ever look at our Illinois budgets, what you do see is that corn is always more profitable than soybeans. On a one-year basis, we do corn after soybeans, corn after corn, continuous corn budgets, and if you compare those to soybean budgets, corn always comes out on top compared to soybeans. But over that time period, 2008 through 2011, we don't see that translating into higher profit on farms that grew more corn. So, and part of what was going on here is that last year, 2011, we had some pretty significant yield drags on corn after corn, but that may be partially the explanation of what was going on. But here is sort of where we come down at that at. First off, there's increases in power costs with higher amounts of corn, and I'll illustrate that next slide. And then there are lower returns from less corn after soybeans. And if you believe that there's any sort of yield drag at all, and we build into our budgets a 10 bushel yield drag for corn after corn, another 8 bushel yield drag for continuous corn. If you build in those yield drags, one of the reasons why soybeans would come into the rotation is so you get more corn after soybeans. And what you're really doing with soybeans is setting yourself up for the more profitable corn after soybeans and getting away from corn after corn. So that's one of the things that is going on here. Soybeans, if there are yield drags out there, and most of the agronomic studies would say that there are, although I'll get many farmers that will argue with me on whether there are or aren't. But if there are, part of the reason what's going on here is that corn after soybeans is more profitable than corn after corn. The other thing that we do see is that when we see more acres going into corn, power costs go up faster than we anticipate. And here's just that slide showing that increase. We anticipate corn after corn machine power costs being higher than soybeans. And part of the reason for that is the harvesting. The harvesting part of the operation will be more expensive for corn. The corn head's more expensive than the soybean head, and you're taking off 3 times the material with corn, except maybe in 2012. But usually you're taking off more material with corn after corn. But we see those costs go up even more quicker than those impacts would suggest. And there can be, we don't know why that's happening, but here's 2 possibilities. One is that as we move to more corn after corn, we see more hauling, transportation capabilities for harvest than lower corn rotations. The second one is we're putting more tillage into corn after soybean or intensive corn rotations. And if we're putting more tillage in there, particular heavy tillage, we're adding cost. And just to give you an illustration of that, this slide shows field operations cost for combining corn, soybeans. Here, chisel plow and offset disc these combining corn and soybean operations come in here close to $30 an acre. That doesn't include any hauling or transportation cost. When we do budgets, we find that roughly half the cost is in harvesting crops, which does have some implications. When we begin to looking at tillage, 50% of the cost you're not doing anything with, no matter what you're doing with as far as your tillage operations. But these chisel plow and offset disc operations are the second most costly operations, followed by planting, drilling, and then field cultivating here. But if we're adding something that's $15 an acre, doing 2 of those, I don't know if that's what we're doing. $30 for a more corn intensive rotation. If you put $30 in there at $5, you got to get 6 bushels of yield to cover those costs. And maybe or maybe not, we're getting those. Stated another way, if we're getting higher corn rotations in there, and we're doing it by adding tillage, we're maybe offsetting some of the gains we expect to see by having more corn in the rotation.
Where is your drying?
Drying actually wouldn't be in any of these. It would be in a separate category. Actually, we're not addressing drying to the.
Add more money to it.
Yeah, that would be add more outside of this as well. No, overall, even aside from power costs, corn will be more costly than soybeans from a fertilizer perspective, drying's perspective, seed cost perspective, and even above that, we still see. storing perspective. So all of those things contribute to corn being a more costly. But this is just harvesting cost, or not field operation power cost. So rotations we don't see as we increase percent acres in corn, that has impacted profitability in the past several years. What I want to do now is one of the questions, or one of the things that we get questions about, is cost of alternative planting systems, and I'm going to show you some engineered or budgeted cost for a couple of different planting systems, and I'll show you what they are on the next slide. One note before we get there, though. If you're looking at cost and power cost or machinery cost, again, harvesting is up here, and then planting is here, and if you're looking at an area where you want to skimp at cost, it probably isn't in the planting area. One of the things that we've noted are differences in power cost across farms. All right, there's two ways that you can make those power costs more costly. Neither one of these deals with rotations. One is have an oversized combine for your size farm, and the second one is have more tractors than you need. And here, what I'm not talking about is the 30-year-old tractor. But you know, the relatively new tractor, and if you have 2 versus 3 on a, that is what adds a lot of cost to power cost. Those two items. Again, I'm going to show you some cost for different planting systems here. This is for an 1,800 acre farm. 2/3 of it is corn, 1/3 of it is in soybeans, and that's a somewhat critical assumptions here. We're going to show these costs for 4 different systems here. One's a 16-row planter. This would be 30-inch rows, and I'm going to assume that you're going to use both of that planter on both crops. So you have one planter, both crops. Then we're going to look at here a 24-row planter, 20-inch rows. So looking at moving to more narrow spacing. If you're looking at this 16 to 24, these two planters are the same width, so you're covering the same area with the same speed here. If you wanted to look at a 15-inch row, it would be more expensive than this. Here we have a 16-row skip row system. Here this system has a 30-inch rows on corn, 15-inch rows on soybeans, one planter, but skip rows. Then one 16-row planter, this planter, but also a 30-foot drill. So this system well, actually all of these systems we have one planter. Here we add a drill to this. And again, we're looking at engineering or budgeting these costs. Here's the cost of the 16-row system. We come out with that at being $12.60 cost, $12.60 per acre cost. Nothing that changes between corn and soybeans. 24-row planter, $13.50, and 2 reasons for those higher costs. And by the way, when we're looking at these costs, we're saying that this planter is going to last 7 years, using depreciation over that 7-year period, and the salvage value of the planter is roughly 30%. I'm not sure, but it's roughly 30% of the new investment cost. This $13.50 is higher than $12.60 because of higher investment per acre. Also because we put a bigger tractor to pull the 24-row planter. 16-row split. We kept the $12.60 the same here as this 16-row planter and attributed all the higher cost of the split row to the bean operations. That would go down on a per acre basis if we had a 50-50 rotation, because you'd be taking more of that cost and spreading it over a few acres. 1460, and then the 16 row 1306. Again, obviously the less cost is 16 row, but looking at that, you know, there's not a lot of difference in those costs either. I mean, 1260 versus 1460 is $2 an acre. Again, we can make a lot more difference in those costs by doing something on the harvesting end of it. One other thing about these costs is that we're pretty much fully utilizing the planters. 16 row on a 1,800 acre. Those differences in those costs would get wider if we were looking at smaller acreages and running them over less acres. One of the things we didn't do here is we didn't include any differences in yields across those systems. And if you can get an agronomist to tell you what the yields are differ across those systems, more power to you. But obviously, you know, even slight yield advantages would make up for the differences in cost here. Again, coming back though, we wouldn't see much difference in planting systems causing much difference in cost per acre. Finally, here, want to compare 4 tillage systems, and this sort of goes back to one of the things that we see when we're looking at more corn is we see where we think we see more tillage. Here I'm going to show differences in 4 tillage cost for no-till, strip till, and again strip till, strip on our anhydrous ammonia and other items. Typical tillage and using a field cultivator, and then deep tillage using some sort of deep tillage operation. I just want to show the differences in cost here. This will be showing up in as a Farm Doc article later this month. But just to give you an example, here on typical tillage, we're putting dry fertilizer on, anhydrous ammonia, we're field cultivating, planting, spraying once again, a third, building a rescue spray in here, combine. Same basic thing for soybean operations, and that comes up with $81.93 of cost, broken out by fuel, implement, and tractor overhead, $81.93. This is typical tillage. Strip till, we put on anhydrous ammonia with a planting bar, or stripping bar, excuse me. But when we do all this done, we get $65 of cost for strip till, $62 for cost, and this would be a blended over corn and soybean acre, no till, and then mid-80s for typical and deep tillage. All those are above where we're at on our cost side. So $20 an acre difference here. So tillage, adding tillage to an operation does make a difference. One point here is that this strip till and this no-till system assumes you've gotten rid of all of the field cultivators and other equipment. If you haven't gotten rid of the equipment, you would still have the overhead costs, the depreciation and the interest. So the advantages of these systems would be partially not done away with. So moving from here to here, or here to here, we're assuming you're getting rid of some of the equipment, or at least that's a long-term objective. But you can also see here that tillage, particularly when you think that most of these strip till and no-till systems, particularly no-till systems, you're probably going to be moving to a corn-soybean rotation. As part of that, it does make a difference on cost. Yeah.
doesn't surprise me at all that it's $20 more with the deep tillage. I'm in a tillage program, but of course, if you got 3 or 4 bushel more corn out of the result, that would wipe that out.
Yep, and you have to go from here to here. You have to have more. You do have to get more bushels. Again, and maybe and you have to get it. Some of the results we present earlier, though, said, well, we're not seeing a difference in profitability, though, either. I don't. So you do have to get it to cover those costs. So, but to summarize here, we do see a link between power cost and profits, and it's a pretty strong cost. Those farms that have lower power cost have higher profits. In coming up with those power costs, sizing equipment is important. Matching the equipment and complements to the farm size is important. Acquisition method isn't as important. Whether you lease it or purchase it, actually, if you're trading even within pretty broad parameters, acquisition isn't important. Higher corn rotations do have higher cost, and we've seen higher cost than we would predict based on budgets. We do see differences in planting systems, but they're not as big as harvesting and tillage. And it does suggest that if you want one area where cost savings may not be important as others is in the planting system, and do think about that you have to justify those heavy tillage operations with more yield. That's our story. Yes, sir.
When you compared the 4 planters, how many acres were you running across total?
1,800 acres total. So we were taking a 16-row planter and running it over 1,800 acres. Then when we went to 16-row planter, 30-foot drill, now we were running that one over 1,200 acres of corn and 600 acres over the drill. Kept the things the same size, and I suppose you could justify this going down. I don't know. I can see it going both ways. You maybe go 12-row planter, but then you'll probably be running the planter. That would be one way to get the cost closer in line, but they weren't that far apart anyway. It's warm in here. You ate. Any other questions here? Oh, you still have 5 minutes.
Price of corn and beans.
What?
Price of corn and beans.
They're going to be different than they are now. So, no, I think if you're looking at price of corn and beans for fall, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say anything that differs from what other people are saying, but if we get a normal to above average crop in the acres that we're looking at, you'll see corn, both corn and soybean prices lower than we are now, and probably below $5. If we get really good yields, you could see $4.50, low $4 corn, and 10-ish soybeans. Reverse that and you have another drought, we'll have the same prices we had last fall with a little bit higher. So tell me what the weather's going to be. Yeah.
Federal crop insurance?
Federal crop insurance. You have a decision to make by March 15th. You know, essentially, most of you in this room took, if you're like typical, you took revenue protection at a 75, 80, and 85% coverage level, enterprise units, and with the trend adjustment policy. If you were happy with that last year, do it again. Same thing, just RP, 80, 85% trend adjustment.
Did pretty well.
Yeah, well, one of these years they won't. But no, I would tend to, and most farmers do, tend to assure them both about the same way. The alternative to that is GRIP HR, which is the county level product. In my opinion, that has certain advantages if you're really concerned about prices falling. Get it at the 90% coverage level, and you'll get better price protection, but you buy about 4 problems. One is that you don't get preventive planting payments. 2 is that you have to wait till March or April to get your insurance payment. You're always concerned about your farm yield not matching the county yield. And 4th, there's always this concern that NASS doesn't get the yields right. So there's more discussion of that this year than others.
And it's more expensive.
And it's more expensive. So most of the premiums I've seen for GRIP HR in the state are running at the highest coverage level, highest protection level, $50 to $60 an acre. You can lower that to $30 to $40 by lowering your protection level.
The revenue protection, 85%, $20 an acre.
Revenue protection, 85%. Enterprise units will be $20 to $25 an acre in northern central Illinois. The 80% policy will be 80% policy, $10 to $15. Yeah.
I haven't heard anything at all. You have any idea if there's going to be acre payments?
Acre payments for 2011, or 2012. 2012, yes, there can be, and I would guess that it looks to me like there will be acre payments for 2012 on corn. If you're signing up for acre, and all of you in this room will have the opportunity to sign up for acre for 2013. And it doesn't matter if you've signed up in it last year or this coming year, or excuse me, it doesn't matter if you've signed up before. You have that option. Here's the way I would put the decision. Chances are you won't get paid for 2013 on acre payment, but it will pay for corn if the prices get below $4.60, $4.50, and it's pretty cheap. You give up 20% of your direct payments, give up $5 for some price protection below, and it might be worth that. It'll be cheaper than buying puts for the same coverage. There is some difference because it is a revenue product, and so yields do matter. But yes, sir.
What's your guess? Do you think the odds are that we'll have direct payments for 2013?
2013, Nick, all right.
Well, sequestration would be an easy way to meet that. It's the direct payments to the farm bill. So.
Yeah, for 2012, you would put near 100%. Or, even given sequestration, 2012 is pretty high. 2013, I would put pretty low. If you pass a farm bill, you're not going to have direct payments. The only way that I see you getting direct payments for 2013 is if they passed an extension to the farm bill, and that extension does nothing to direct payments. My guess to get even if they get an extension to the farm bill, they'll reduce direct payments or maybe even eliminate them.
We're expecting direct payments this year. What's the likelihood that, with budgeting what it is, that we might not get direct payments?
Yeah, anything's possible. The thinking is that it'd be really hard to not give the 2012 payments because they've already begun the sign up. But predicting political things is a bit less, is about like predicting the weather. I would,
2013, aren't you?
You mean
2012's in the bag.
no, 2012, you're thinking that the sequestration might impact the direct payments in 2012.
No, I mean in 20. 13,
This is
the year we're in now.
2013 this year.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. 20. I was a year behind. I'm still catching up here. 2013. The thinking is the only thing that can impact the 2013 payments is the sequestration. And I personally, I don't see how they could eliminate them. I could see where they would reduce them, but it might be hard.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a pretty easy way to meet sequestration requirements is to just reduce direct payments for 13. But yeah, direct payments in 2014,
0.
yeah, I don't think that's happening.
How about changing RMA?
Not for 2014. Again, we're projecting here. They say we'll answer this one question, and then they're saying we're done. RMA will not. To make RMA change, you'll have to have an act of Congress, and I don't see that happening in 2014. It could, but after. What's that?
It'd be the first time they agreed on anything.
Yeah, that is true. But you can expect to see RMA and credit crop facing at the very least increasing scrutiny moving on. Increasing. All right. So far, the environmental groups and others have targeted commodity programs. They're going to increasingly target crop insurance. We appreciate your time and thank you.